This week, I created a sample library of synth drum sounds, and I'm sharing these with my patrons and YouTube members. Let's take a look. So all these sounds were created on my Minilogue XD. We're going to get into some of the specific techniques later in this video. But for now, let's jump into the sampling session, how it's set up. And if you wanted to create your own sample library, you can do something similar to this. Basically, I create a sound on the synth. When I like that sound, I just hit record. I've got one track. In this case, it's called XD Raw because it's a Minilogue XD, and this is the raw recording. The recordings will look something like this. So there's a raw recording. Then I use a tool called Dynamic Split, which can be found under the item processing submenu of the item menu. Dynamic Split, just have the item selected, and then you're going to split when the gate opens and closes. You don't have to do it this way, but when you have a lot of clean recordings with clear transients, it works really well. In this case, it's such a small thing. It's easier just to go tab and then trim the start and then trim the end like that. And yeah, so for these other longer recordings, that's basically the process. I went through, I used Dynamic Split to roughly get things shortened properly, and then I would zoom in and just tab through and make sure that each item is cleanly trimmed, so there's nothing before the edge of the item, and then at the end there's a little bit of fade. But I did those fades as a batch fade. And then once I had all of those cut, I selected them all. You can double click on a track in the track control panel to select all items. Right click on one of them, go to item processing, and then normalize. And here I used a peak of -3, normalizing each item separately. So every item in the project is peaking at -3. So there's a bit of headroom for processing, and there's just a lot more consistency between drum samples. This isn't a real drum kit, so I wasn't concerned about different velocity layers or anything like that. This isn't made to make a realistic sounding kit. This is a collection of one-shot samples with synth sounds. So here's some kick sounds. Here's some subs. Here's some toms. Here's some explosions. And some snares sort of sounds. And some weird flutter hits. And some views. And that's different from a pew and zaps. So lots of different synth-focused sounds that can be used as percussion, sound effects, and things that I came up with within, I don't know, an hour or two of just, playing around with various techniques for getting percussive sounds from a synth. So after everything was trimmed and normalized, I went through and started categorizing things with regions. So things like kick tight, kicks punchy, and anything that I wanted to keep in the library, I would move down to its own track. So I would copy down to a kick track for the kicks, or a tom track, or subs track. And this is just kind of for organization and to separate things that are raw from what's already processed and things like that. 4 different sound libraries. If you are layering sounds, if you're doing any sort of processing on individual sounds, having versions of the raw, then processed, or raw, then edit, then process, those sorts of things help you stay organized. You can easily backtrack. It's just helpful. And then stuff that I really didn't want in there, I just ended up muting those items. Once everything that I wanted to keep was moved down to their own tracks, I muted the original raw recordings, But because these are still below the regions, I was able to export them using the region wildcard and selected media items. So if I select these 10 items and go to where here it says 10 files, I've got noise snare 1 through 10. So it automatically numbers those, and it uses the names of the regions that are above those items. So tonal hit and explosion, I check this, tonal hit 1 through 5, explosion 1 through 5. There is a little bit of processing on the master, just a little bit of EQ to taste, and a little bit of tape saturation on the whole thing. Really not a whole lot. This is kind of raw but shaped in a way. The sounds are kind of dirty. They're coming from an analog synth with the drive control all the way up. On pretty much every one of these sounds, I was using the built-in distortion on that synth. There's then running through a little analog mixer with some EQ adjustments per sound, and then into the computer. Next, I'm going to show you some of the techniques that I used to create the sound library on the synth. All right, so we're going to go through some of these techniques that I used to create drum sounds on the Minilogue XD. This is not a synth that's made for drum sounds, but yeah, you can kind of apply these to any sort of subtractive synth, anything that has a filter, anything that has noise generators, that sort of thing. This is the starting patch. You know, initial patch, a single sawtooth. We're going to turn off all of the mixer channels, so none of the oscillators are enabled. Hear nothing, but we're going to do a couple things here. We're going to set the filter to all the way down and the resonance all the way up. We're going to set the drive all the way up and the key track on. Key track basically adjusts the filter that in a way that follows the keys. So now we're getting this low tone, and that's not an oscillator, that's just the filter resonance. And with the key track off, actually with higher notes, you hear that. All right, so we're now going to adjust the envelope, and this is the one that can adjust the cutoff filter. So this is the normal ADSR, and then this one just has an attack and decay and an amount that you can apply that to the filter or the pitch. So this is turned off, and the decay will adjust. And so we're barely hearing anything because the filter is all the way down. And again, that's not an oscillator, that's just the filter resonance. All right, so how do we make this more into a drum sound? We're going to adjust the envelope amount, and we want this to go upward. So the filter's all the way down, we need the filter to go upward, so we're going to turn this envelope up. And so that's more like a sort of a kick drum sound now. Besides that, also using the unison mode often. It just gives a little bit of stereo width, kind of offsets the processing in some way. All right, so that's kind of like a deep kick sort of sound. If we try to make like a tom using the similar sort of thing, we're going to do the cutoff going up. So for a tom, it's usually pitch dropping. And we usually want the decay to be the volume envelope or more than the cutoff envelope. So sometimes that can add a little kind of attack, or it can add sort of like a pitch drop, because we're using that key track and a high resonance. It gives that laser effect. But without the resonance, well, we're not really going to hear anything. We need an oscillator there. Actually, let's do it with the high pass noise. So that's sort of like a snare or a hi-hat kind of sound. Yeah, that's basically the techniques that I was using to get drum sounds out of this Minilogue XD. The only additional processing on the analog side was going through this mixer. And so channel 5, 6 is where I have this synth coming in, and it'll do things like adding a bit of lows or a bit of highs, or for like snare sounds and clap sounds, cranking up the mids, 15 dB more mids really helps. And I didn't really use any other processing on this. I'm not overdriving this or anything like that. It's nice and clean, but that EQ does help to kind of steer the sound into the right direction. So that's it for this video. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you found this interesting, let me know in the comments. If you want to get this, you have to be a patron or a YouTube member. There'll be a post on each of those websites for how to get the sample library. And if you create something with this library, let me know. I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Support the Reaper blog through Patreon, and visit reaperblog.net for a lot more tutorials.